Hey guys, what is up? My name is Ivan. This is my very first YouTube video, and in this video what I want to do is talk about what my experience was like interviewing at Google for a software engineering position. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, so the first thing worth mentioning is how did I come by this interview in the first place? Like how did I get the actual Google interview? And that all starts with a really good friend of mine who was a teacher's assistant at the local university here. He worked, at a local company as well, just doing software engineering. Really bright guy. He tried a couple of times himself to get into Google, and I think on his third time he actually he passed the interview and he got in, and it was really awesome. Everybody was really excited for him. It was super cool. It wasn't too much long after that, I want to say 3 months down the line or so, that he just kind of messaged me and said, hey man, if you're interested in working here, I can definitely get you a referral. And if you don't know what that process is like, or what the interview process is like at Google, getting a referral is like your free ticket to actually getting an interview. I've heard lots of people have trouble with just applying through their online portal and never being contacted, applying 10, 20, 30 times and never being contacted. One of the best ways to actually get your foot in the door there is to get a referral. So that's what I got. I got a referral. After that point, you're going to go ahead and you're going to set up a phone interview, and this is typically going to be a technical phone interview. I mean, obviously depending on the type of position you are interviewing for, but your typical software engineering position is going to be, you're going to have a technical phone interview. So that's what my next interview was. So, I remember I was pretty nervous coming into that interview. Didn't really, I think it's easy for a lot of people, and especially myself, to just sort of get nervous about what to expect. You don't know how it's going to go until you're sort of in the seat taking the interview. So I went into it feeling a little nervous, but the interview itself, I feel like, went fairly well overall, was sort of my impression of it at the end of it. To give you guys a little bit of flavor of what sort of the format of that interview was, I remember I had one pretty easy warm-up question. It was I want to say a simple variation on a Fibonacci problem, which if you've done any algorithms problems, that's one of the first recursive interview problems you'll come across. And it was a simple variation on that, which I was able to solve pretty handily. And then another portion to that question was actually using Python generators, which, don't get me wrong, I've done a fair bit of Python coding, but never, most of it scripting, not super. I guess long story short, I haven't used a lot of Python generators before, so I wasn't super prepared for that one, but once he explained to me sort of conceptually, he being my interviewer, conceptually what they were, I didn't have too much problem with it. And then the next part of the interview was where it got a little bit trickier. It was, it kind of roughly revolved around parsing a file with some complicated line delimiters and then asking questions on, well, how would you distribute the processing of this file if it was, a huge file, billions and billions of lines or terabytes worth of data. So a little bit of questions on just distributed systems and how do you think about that in general. So that was the end of that interview. Next thing that happened was the waiting game. So ended up waiting a day or two, got a call back from my recruiter, and hooray, good news, I made it past that interview. So what was the on-site interview actually like? Well, format-wise, it was pretty straightforward. About as straightforward as you can expect for a software engineering interview. To clarify, I was interviewing for, and if you're interested to go a little bit more in depth on this, get some more information, you can definitely find a lot of this information online for the software engineering levels of Google. I was interviewing for an L3 position, which I was kind of borderline L3, L4, not to go too much into detail on that. But they recommended I interview for an L3 because it was going to be a little bit easier of an interview, and that might make sense from a just mental standpoint of feeling better about the interview instead of, kind of getting overwhelmed by something that was too hard. So that's the interview I went for. Pretty straightforward format. It's just 4 coding interviews. That's really all you have to expect for this. And that might vary a little bit from team to team. I think I had a friend who did 5 coding interviews for his Google interview, but mine was 4, interviewing for the YouTube team to be just a back-end engineer. Yeah, so jumping into the first interview, what was that like? My first interview was definitely intimidating. I didn't really know what to expect yet. Obviously, the campus was really cool. I was just kind of mesmerized by everything going on around. You're at Google. Oh my God, this is so fun. What's going on? Oh wait, I actually have to code now. Okay. Um, so yeah, that was kind of my mindset going into the first interview. Um, I remember I got my question, and to give as much detail as I can remember on that, it was basically a question revolving around array manipulation with two pointers was kind of the optimal solution. Um, and I'll actually go ahead and link a really good problem on LeetCode that was really similar to the problem I got. If you guys are interested to see what that problem was like, you can play around with it and try and come up with your own solutions. It was a really good problem for an interview, I felt like. So I came to a simple solution pretty quickly. I realized I could use a stack to get an O event runtime and O event space complexity, but my interviewer wanted me to do better on the space complexity. And that's where it got a little tricky, because that basically means going to constant space complexity. So it required a little bit of thinking. And that's sort of where I ended up coming to the idea of using two pointers to solve that question. Anyway, that's as much detail as I'll go to on that one. Let's jump to interview number 2. So, second interview. Coming off my first interview, felt pretty okay. Like, my code was, I might have had a bug or two in the final solution I got on the board, but I felt okay about it. Not super great, not super bad. Second interview was one that I was pretty excited once I actually got my question, which was a binary tree type of question. I love these types of questions. I think they're so much fun. They are kind of mind-bending, especially if you're not super comfortable with recursion and writing recursive algorithms. But they're really cool once you sort of get the answer and once your brain sort of starts to understand how they work. So yeah, I can't really remember the specifics of the problem. It was a recursive problem. It involved a post-order traversal of a binary tree. Fairly straightforward. I stumbled a little bit because the first conclusion I came to the first solution I came to rather was wrong, and my interview pointed that out pretty quick, and that kind of left me feeling, it kind of took a hit, or it picked away at my confidence a little bit. I think to wrap up that interview, I felt okay about that one as well. I did end up getting a working solution by the end of the interview. The only issue was I was a little not feeling super confident about the number of hints and help it took me to get there. So that was maybe where I wasn't feeling the best about that interview, but still okay overall. All right, so interview number 3. This was the one that I want to say I felt the shakiest on overall, and that was just because the subject matter was something I wasn't familiar with at all. So the question I got was, and it's still a little bit fuzzy in my mind because it's been a while now, but it had to do with a sparse vector implementation. And the instant she said the word sparse vector, I was like, I'm in trouble. I don't know what that is. So no big deal, I guess. She kind of explained exactly the definition of it. And what we wanted the API to do for this. It was basically a data structure implementation. Implement a sparse vector with a specific API. And so yeah, I struggled a little bit just because, especially if you're in that kind of place where you're like, I don't even know what that is, that's gonna be weighing on you in the interview a little bit, and it was definitely weighing on me. And I think it showed in my implementation. I needed a lot of help. I think I came to a reasonable working solution by the end of the interview, but still wasn't feeling great about that interview overall. I felt like I could have done a lot better, especially if I knew what a sparse vector was coming into the interview. Okay, last interview number 4. This one was probably the interview I felt best about overall, which was kind of surprising because usually the last interviews you're really burnt out, you're just ready to go home, your brain is like mush by this point. So yeah, in this one I was definitely feeling a little, kind of brain mushy going into it. But I really enjoyed the question, and it had to do, without giving away too many details, it was kind of a variation on just building a currency exchanger, right? So exchanging US dollars to euro or something like that, and you had to build it for multiple different currencies. And yeah, that was kind of the basis of the question. So I struggled with the implementation at first a little bit because I was trying to kind of thinking like, oh yeah, I can use a couple of hash maps and maybe just do like lookup tables to find what the exchange rate is, and that seemed good and like I could get to a solution for it, but it was also kind of clunky. And then at some point it kind of just dawned on me like, aha, I can use a graph to solve this pretty easily. And at that point, it was just like I had a moment where I'm like, I know exactly what I need to do to solve this question, and so I kind of solved it from that point. And there was maybe a bug or two in my final product before it was, like kind of tidied up. But I felt like I came to a really good working solution in that interview with basically no hints or help from my interviewer. So yeah, I felt really good about that one. So I guess that's kind of the conclusion of the interview. To wrap things up, I left feeling pretty okay about my chances. I did hear back from my recruiter, I want to say 2 or 3 days later, and unfortunately I did not get the job offer. So that sucked to hear because I did feel like I had a chance at the end of the process. But yeah, they didn't end up offering me the job. A couple good things did come from that though, and that's that. I mean, obviously it was a good experience. Like, no matter the more interviews you do, the better you're going to get at them. So I feel like I took a little bit of that away from it. I ended up getting an offer to come back on site in the future once at least 12 months had passed to interview again, and basically getting to skip the phone interviews and everything that preceded that. So that's nice. And I got contacted by a different Google department, I want to say just a couple months later, to interview for a strategic cloud engineer role. And if you don't know what that is, I might do another video on that, but that's, yeah, kind of its own subject matter altogether. And I did go do an interview loop for that. Anyway, I'd say that about wraps up my experience interviewing for a software engineering position at Google. So, let me know if you like this, if you found it helpful at all. Please subscribe if so. I plan on making more of these to cover like all of my interview experiences with the big tech companies. So yeah, and that's about it.